Always weird to see your own face. Hi, my name's Wynne, and I am the head of product design at Paperless Post. For those of you who don't know Paperless Post, it's an online invitation company. It's founded in 2008 by a brother and sister duo who wanted something better than Evite to invitation that expresses themselves more, and something that is not as expensive as paper invitations. So currently we have 100 million users, including hosts and guests, and 300 million cards sent. So a little bit about me. I have been in the industry for about 10 to 15 years, and I've built products from design products like photo, music. LimeWire is one of them, if you guys know, geolocation apps, and consumer products. So I started out as a graphic design major. My first job happened to be a tech company, so I picked up how to code, and then slowly my role turned into product design. I started out calling myself a web designer, and then they didn't really have product design back then, but now product design is a thing. Cool. So I'll be talking a little bit about the stages of design, how we at Paperless Post think about it, and then breaking it down into elements of the design within the stages so that you can better understand how designers work with product manager into understanding the user and solving problems for them. And then I'll quickly go through a case study at Paperless Post. So this is the framework from the British Design Council. And there's a lot of other design frameworks like IDEO or from the D School, Stanford D School. But I like this one because it's simpler to understand. The first part of the diamond is to make sure that we're solving for the right problem. And then the second one is basically finding the right solution. And both are simple. You diverge and you're trying to collect as much information, or you brainstorm as much as you can, and then the second part is converging, finding the problem, scoping down your problem, or choosing the right design, and then go from there. So this is and then in between this, where usually when you're designing, when you're looking for the right problem. After that, in the middle is where we usually present it to the whole team to say, like, this is the problem space, this is like the scope that we're looking at, and then usually have buy-in from like the development team to leadership team, and then we move on to designing. So how do you find the right problem? How do you know? Because usually, when you're in meetings and you're like, oh, how do we get people to, go through this page and convert, and then people will throw out answers. And those are usually not helpful because we haven't defined the problem yet. So what's nice about this framework, it works for small problems, for like optimization, or even like bigger problems where you're building a new feature from the ground up. And depending on what type of what you're trying to solve, you might do some user research or market research or some competitive analysis, or maybe just go to your team and see what customers are complaining about. But this is really about gathering data and also kind of audit what your constraints of your dev team can build and how much time you have. And then the next step would be, once you have all your data, you synthesize and you figure out what the problem really is, and then make sure that you shelf problems that are too ambitious, or sometimes people are like, well, maybe we can use like machine learning to solve this problem, and it's like, no, because that takes a year or something like that. So we can't always depend on developers to solve problems. Sometimes problems need to be solved by design, and you need to figure out what that is, and you have to balance impact with effort. Ideally, greatest impact, least amount of effort is usually what most people like. And once you have that defined, then everybody agrees on the scope and the problem space, then you start brainstorming and you sketch. And these are really loose wireframes. You're generally laying out what the page might look like. You're thinking about how people are going through the pages, and what the user is thinking. And then once you find a couple of candidates, then you do some high-def prototyping, or you do some high-def mock-ups, and you can do some hallway testing, which is testing with people at the office, or you go downstairs to Starbucks and just show people stuff and just see what their reaction is, depending on what you're trying to solve for. Sometimes you're just trying to understand people. If it's a home page, you're just trying to see if people understand your language. What are their reactions? Are you answering the questions that they're asking, or do you need more education? That kind of stuff. So then we could break it down into the elements of what I just explained. And the first two elements that you see, which is strategy and scope, kind of fits into the first diamond, where you're trying to figure out your problem set. And then the rest is really the rest is really where the designer goes in and starts laying it out and think through the solution. So the best strategy is when you can solve what the user's need is combined with the business goal. Usually if you just have if you're just trying to solve for the user, then you're not really helping the business, and sooner or later you're not going to have a job. If you just solve for business, then it sounds like all you need is a big button on the page and just try to make people click it. That would be the quickest way for you to solve for business. So those are not really the solution that we're looking for. We're always looking for a way that can solve both at Paperless Post. Then the next step is this requirement and specification. So this is where you're scoping down your problem. And let's say, for instance, we're thinking about we want to be able to deliver the invitation, and usually either the product manager or the designer goes in and they kind of write down, this is we need something to deliver a page where the user can enter in emails or something, and then we need the email to be built, and then things should we have tracking meaning for us, the host would be able to see if someone opened their email or if they replied yes or no. And then why I have things in dotted line is this is kind of where we as a team think about whether this should be included in the scope, or should we leave it out for V1, depending on the time limit and depending on what user feedback we want, what we want to learn from the design. Then we might leave out tracking. Maybe we want to just make sure that we have an end-to-end flow where the host can send an invitation, a simple invitation, and then the receiver can see the invitation, and that's it. And then we'll go from there. And then and the functional spec is written really for developers to understand what goes on to these pages, and also for the designers to design it out and have an agreement about what we're designing and what we'll be building, and then how it may work. Once we have that figured out, then the first part of the design is really thinking about the information architecture of the page. And it's really thinking about how we organize information on the website for the user to understand. The way we think about it at Paperless Post is once the user comes in through the homepage, what are they thinking to do? And we split the page into two sections. One is they're coming here because they're returning back and they need to manage an event, or they're coming here to create an event. So I have the purple side where this is where you're organizing by category, and then the other side is just like recent event may go first because we know if they're coming back to manage their event, then we want that to be the first thing they see so that they don't have to dig through the pages. And this is just a general layout for people to kind of understand what we're thinking and how we want the user to understand our page. The way Paperless Post organize our categories, it might seem weird when you see like birthday. Sorry. Okay. The way we organize at Paperless Post, the categories on top, you might see birthday, wedding, parties, and then all of a sudden it's cards. And the reason we do this is just to like help users narrow down their choices quickly. We know that most of the time when they come in, that they're either choosing birthday, wedding, or general entertainment. And the other thing is when the user reads the nav, like most of the time when you go to a web page, you scan the web page and then you kind of look at their nav and then you get an idea of what they're selling. So that's why we designed the nav to be this way. It's just so that user can quickly understand what Paperless Post has to offer. Those little dots just represent like there's more in the navigation tree. So once you have these general architecture laid out, the designer will start thinking about how a user might navigate those pages. And this is where you may see like some designers do like user flows, and this is kind of like how they're thinking about how a user thinks about, how a designer thinks about a user might go through the flow. And if you think about interaction design, user design, when we're designing, we're trying to design a way for the user to navigate, and we as a company or the designer has a purpose for the user, but obviously we're not always there with the user. So we have to think about their expectations and then like what they think about before they come to the step and what they think about after they leave the step, so that there's no surprises for them and we're not trying to be too like clever and then get the user confused. And usually when we think about these things, we think about the user's mental model. So whatever they're used to think about, whatever they're used to, then we try to copy it so it's not that different and strange for them. A lot of times, a good way that we think about it is that I have the designer look at like websites like Amazon, any sites that people go to a lot, just because even if they have a bad pattern, people use it enough that it becomes a pattern, and then it makes sense to kind of like just reference it. If people are used to that, then that's where you should probably copy them or something like that. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. So here's just like an example of how we think about a user comes in, they have a party, then they have to choose a category. They know the event they have, so we should make the navigation easy for them. And then they pick a design, they customize, and that's where we kind of try to upsell people on envelopes and backgrounds and stuff, because now that they picked something that they like, it's easier to like upsell them on. And then once they finish designing their cards, they'll be they're happy with their card, so they don't mind going to the next step where they add event details and then add recipients, and then we tell them that they may need more coins, and then they send. So that's kind of how we think about the flow. But this is like obviously a simplified version of it. Then once we know the flow, we go one step deeper into the detail, and we're looking into the page now. And this is where you see wireframes. And The idea of a wireframe is obviously to consider the navigation. First and foremost, make sure that when it's usually not like one page, you see a couple of pages, and then you can see how the user understands the navigation from one page to another, but also how they're navigating down a page. You have UI elements, and this is where we make decisions on, what's emphasized, what's de-emphasized, what do users absolutely need to fill in, and then maybe is it better that we give them hints on how they should name their event, or and then things like, should we do increments of 15 minutes, or should we make them scroll through 60 minutes? So this is where we make those design decisions. And then the next level is where you have visual design. And this is where we normally think it's easy, it's just coloring in, but there's more to it. I mean, when this is where you buy someone's confidence and they believe that you're like a really, how much they want to pay you really depends on how it looks. It's part of the brand. And that's why if you think about like handbags, functionally, they all do the same thing, but you have $20 handbags and you have $10,000 handbags. And the difference is really quality, but it does the same thing. So if you think about that, and if you want your people to spend more on your product, then a lot of it is dependent on how it looks and how it makes someone feel. Besides that, it also obviously reinforces the structure of the page, and then you can also help denote, draw attention to different things on the website depending on what people need. So here I have we have green and blue, and automatically on this actually, let me step back. This page is where a host may look at their events, and then they're just tracking how many people are coming and how many people aren't. And the first thing they really want to know is how many people are coming. So that's why we would put color in attending and regrets, so that's the first thing they would see, and then click in to do more. And then the last layer that designers think about is motion design, and it's usually really not a lot of companies support this because this takes a lot of time, and it breaks a lot, especially on mobile web. But motion design really adds the final branding element to it, and it also emphasizes things for the user, and it helps user understand spatially where they are depending on how they're navigating through the page. Whether something is coming up from the bottom up, that's a modal, that it goes away. But if you're going from side to side, you're actually traveling deeper and deeper into your steps. So, and then also obviously you always see the spinner motion also helps let user know how long they have to wait. And so are there any questions before I dive into the case study? No. Okay. So paperless post. Our value proposition is modern convenience of online communication with the same personal touch and beauty of traditional invitation, meaning that we wanted people to get the same design as paper cards, but don't have to pay the same price as paper cards. And the model that Paperless Post is, we're a freemium model. You can choose cards that starts off free, and then you can pay for upgrades and digital coins around 27 cents, and usually, so like a birthday party might end up to be around $10 to $15, depending on how many people you invite. So this project was thinking about top funnel conversion, meaning when the user enters in from the home page or an email or something like that, how do we get them to click create, which is start designing? And it's all about optimizing that flow. And the hypothesis that we were thinking of, we came up with is that at each stage of the flow, the user has different types of questions, and we should be answering the right questions at the right time instead of putting all the education up front or like putting all the education at the end. If we knew what they were thinking, and usually you kind of know what they're thinking, then we can put in messaging at the right time and not have to like disturb their flow as they choose the card that they're looking for. So when you're working on something like Paperless Post or any kind of e-commerce site, you have so many things. You have all these teams that want to communicate their message to the user. So you have like the brand team who like wants to make everything beautiful and let the user know like what we're about. And then you have the product team that wants the user to know we have these new features and this is how Paperless Post works. And then you have the merchandising team and say like, well, it's Mother's Day, so I want Mother's Day card on top. And then usually the designer and the product managers on those teams have to really balance those requests out and like, so who do you what do you put first on top? Because nobody wants to be below the fold, right? So we work really hard with those different teams to figure out, to come up with a kind of plan to explain to them, this is what we think the user is thinking, and this is why, Mother's Day is not going to be up top or whatever, and it's only going to be top for 2 days, and then later on we're gonna feature something else. Then you get the lay of the land. So these are the pages that the user will need to go through. Homepage, landing page, which is landing page might be maybe users coming through email or SEO, but they serve sort of like homepage, except when the user comes in, they have a specific party. So it's like either wedding or birthday, and we would tailor those pages for those event types. And then you have the product listing page, which is like you see cards. And then finally the product description page, which is where we're trying to close the deal and get the user to click on that create button. So what is the customer decision-making phase? Usually they do a quick assessment when they come here to your site, or they come to a store and they look around, and they generally know whether they like your product or not, and they're trying to figure out if they like your brand, if it fits me, and then they generally feel like you have the features probably, but they're not really thinking about it yet because they just want to make sure that you have the card that they want, right? And then they start browsing the invitation, looking at cards. Then maybe when they find something that they like, that's when they're like, okay, how much does this cost? How do you send this? And what other features are there? And then finally, that's when they like decide whether they're gonna click customize. So when we break that down even more, a quick assessment, this is when the user comes on a landing page or a home page. And they're thinking about, what does Paperless Post sell? Do I like the brand? And then that's the first thing that we need to answer, and that's why we have like a huge, beautiful header that like shows you these beautiful events that if you use Paperless Post, this is the type of event you would be hosting. And then what they need to assess the brand, and they need to understand the high-level product offering. And that's that's how we design the page, where we show them a snippet of like basically what Paperless Post has to offer. We have these brands. We have Kate Spade. We have Oscar de la Renta. If you're into brands, this is generally how you like a 1, 2, 3 step how to. This is how Paperless Post works. You choose a card. You can customize it, and then you send it, and then also promote other event types that we have. And then we expect the user to just scroll down the page in 10 seconds, look at pictures, and understand that this is what they need. Then the next step they would do is probably, once they're sold on that, they want to find that invitation. And to do that, they're looking for the category. They're like, do you have Cinco de Mayo cards, or like specific cards, or do you have birthday cards? And we need to make sure that our navigation works for that and search works for that. And And then what we want them to know at this point is probably to move them further down the step is you can customize your designs. You can change the text. You can add your own photo. You can change the backdrop if you want. You can add envelopes, stamps, all that stuff while they're looking. But we're not trying to, without them, go look for a how-to page. So this is kind of like part of an upsell. Finally, this is where once they choose their card, they're going to start figuring out if this is worth their time. Should I, how much is this? How much does it cost? How does it work? And we try to answer that on the detail page so that they can move and make a decision on the product. And make sure that they're confident with the product. So this is the home page of Paperless Post. And after this design, we increased the average order value of 15% and decreased bounce rate by 3%. And what we did is what I explained before earlier, where we have a beautiful head page up there, a beautiful header image to show you the type of events that you may possibly have to get people inspired. And then we have a quick 1, 2, 3. This is how it works. If you want to learn more, you can click in, and then the rest is basically this is how beautiful our cards are. Most of the time, users, when they come in and they scroll up and down, they'll go directly to the nav because they know what the type of events they're having. So they scroll down, they go back up, and they usually just use the nav to get to the card that they need. And then these don't really get that many clicks, but it's really for education purposes. And then this is a wedding landing page, so it's a little bit different than the home page. Weddings are different, are very involved events. It's a one in a life, you only do this once. And brides are usually very nervous, so they need a lot of hand holding because they've never done this before, and everywhere you go, everything costs an arm and a leg. So obviously we're the thing that we say, we're here to help. If you need help, we can help you. Here are the features that we have for a wedding. It's tracking your guests, because if you send it out in paper, it's really hard to see who, then you have to call them and ask them to reply. But with Paperless Post, you can just send them a follow-up email and get them to reply. So, and then also we have other, wedding kind of save the dates and bridal showers, and also an address book to make it easier for you to invite. And this also increased the average order value of 18%. So we tracked, what's nice about having, quantitative measurements for everything we designed, then it helps the designer focus on what they need to work on, and where they need to increase, what the story is, the problems that is. And then this is the product listing page, and if you can see, I don't know if you can see, but we stripped out a lot of information about the card in here. If we used to have if you look at the card underneath it, there would be pricing, and there would be other variations of the card. And we did a lot of A/B testing, and the reason why we started testing is because we had a hunch that people were just looking at pictures, and they were just trying to find something that they liked, and they weren't really reading anything else. So by stripping out a lot of information, and then just add a little bit of education at the right time, because we know that users are, they're finding that they're looking at cards, and then something might pop in their head. Oh, how can I change the text on this, or can I put an image in here? So we tried to put in a little bit of education in there to just kind of give them a little bit more confidence and learn about Paperless Post's product offerings. And then finally, this is the product description page. So this is where we try to close the deal. We try to get the user to click that big blue button. And so we realized that a lot of users, because we try to get them through the funnel quickly, they didn't really know that there's this beautiful animation at the end. So when you click into a card that you like, you can see that we have other matching designs, and then you can preview with the card and you can preview the animation, and this is what actually did got people to click customize. And we also stripped out a lot of information except for pricing information, because that's what people are interested in at that moment. And then that's it. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. And if you have any questions for me, feel free. I don't know. I kind of raced through this because I didn't know how much time I had. Oh, yes.
What sort of process do you go through when you get to a point where you want to create a new product, or you're considering something new versus iterating on what was already created? What's usually your guys' approach?
So the question is, what's our process when we're trying to create something brand new versus iterating or optimizing something? So that's a very good question. Right now, we have a new product that we're launching called Flyer, and it's really to expand our user base, because as you can see, Paperless Post right now is really for more formal, traditional gatherings, and we want the other types of events, which is more casual. So the same process that I just went through is the same thing, but it's just more involved. And you might, instead of besides going to, if you're optimizing a page, you might just go to customer services and ask them what are users kind of complaining about, and then you might do some user testing and see where the hiccups are. But for a new product like what we're trying to do, then we do a lot more like competitive analysis. We look at what other people are doing. We're looking at their pricing structure, and then we're thinking about like the pros and cons of each product, and then obviously our own. So when we're comparing the new product, we know that we want design to be the reason why people come to Paperless Post, but functionality to be the reason why people stay at Paperless Post. So we think about what this new product needed to be, and we understood that for design, like we need to create a ecosystem, a way for people to design within our expertise. So we created this thing called vibes, and so that they can pick and choose within a vibe and create something within 5 minutes. So so those are like the steps that it's the same steps, but it's more involved basically. But what I was going to say is, for the new flyer that we designed, it takes a user 5 minutes to design a card, versus our old traditional product, it takes about 20 minutes. So we kind of like optimize for those types of events. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just touching on that. So how do you guys validate whether or not it's worth building out something new?
So how do we validate whether it's worth building out? We also did a lot of surveys within our user base, and then we also send out third-party surveys for profiles of people that we currently don't have. So maybe like ladies that are around 25 to 35, and then male also around 25 to 35. Yeah, and then like seeing what type of events they're having, and then also like their styles, and then start from there. And then we would create, MVPs, start with MVPs, test out like something really simple. If you go to Paperless Post Flyer, you'll see what our MVP is, and then slowly add to the feature set. But it's while we're adding, we're obviously optimizing. So we're like thinking about last quarter, we're like, how do we get more people to finish editing? So now that we like brought that up to a week-over-week growth of 30%, more people finishing the editing flow. Now we're focusing on how do we get them to share more. So it's pretty much the same process, except you do more research, really. You're welcome. Hi.
Hi. My name is Peter. I'm a product designer and strategist.
Cool.
My question is kind of long, so bear with me.
Okay, I'm going to try to
So,
remember.
You guys started as a digital company.
Yes.
Like a fully digital company.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point you listened to your users,
Mm-hmm.
what great designers do, and then you decided to go into paper
Yes.
in addition to, going digital.
Mm-hmm.
But then after a while you probably realized that, hey, this is not really our business model, and
Yes.
the future is not really in paper, and
Right.
there are other companies that are doing it better, and whatever other reasons that might be.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, like, from a business and brand perspective, we realized that our core values and, like, where we started is really in digital.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is, like, how do you, like, figure out, like, what is pulling stronger and whether you are making, like, a good decision? Because, like, maybe if you guys didn't make the decision then and, put your resources right away into doing even more digital, maybe, right, today maybe you could already have, like, more advanced products and whatnot.
Right.
Right? So my question is, like, how do you kind of feel whether, like, our users are telling us this is a problem, but do we really want to kind of solve that problem?
So your question is really like, we were doing online invitations, and then we listened to our users. So then we went to do paper,
Right.
but then we realized, and then you're like, why are we getting rid of paper or going back to online when our users wanted paper?
Well, I get
Okay.
I get why you're going back to mine. Like, this is where the future is.
Yes.
And there are other companies that are probably doing paper better than you are, paper source, right?
Yeah.
So I guess, like, how do you know at that moment where you come across the user and the user tells you something, and then maybe you are thinking, oh, this is a great opportunity, we should go into that direction. Like, how can you, like, what did you guys learn from that experience? So next time, a user will tell you something, like, you will be more aware, I guess, of what
Right.
like, what did you learn from the experience of going into...
So what did we learn from our experience going, supporting paper and then like not supporting paper and making sure that we don't make that sort of mistake again? So that's a really good question. I think we went for paper and we decided that's what our user wanted, and we thought that would be what happened was that after years of supporting paper, we realized we were putting a lot of energy, a lot of development time into paper and less on online. And that's when we decided that for the business, it actually made more sense if we focused a lot more on online. And it was like really a business decision. And I think next time, if we were to do some big move like that, we would be more diligent in kind of thinking about how much money we would be spending on developers and designers designing for this product, and making sure that we get that money back when how much we put in, how much effort we put in for the impact that we want. I think that's the problem with when we were a younger company and we weren't really thinking that much about how much effort and money you're putting into something and how much you're actually getting back.